right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, a pretty remarkable thing happened yesterday morning. President Trump appears to have woken up to the fact that in not pursuing a major economic populist recovery plan in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression is not exactly the best idea for re-election prospects in the long term. Trump zeroed in on Democratic congressional leadership's complete refusal to even consider a new coronavirus relief program put forward by Republicans, saying, quote, Democrats are heartless. They don't want to give stimulus payments to people who desperately need the money and whose fault it was not that the plague came in from China. Go for the higher numbers, Republicans. It all comes back to the USA anyway, one way or another. Now, the media focused in on the first part of that tweet, going after the Democrats, but anyone who watches Rising can see what immediately caught my eye. Trump, in his own way, is acknowledging that Republicans were the real problem when it came to increased stimulus payments, and making the correct argument that money spent now will, in fact, come around in benefits to the United States in the future. The tweet encapsulates a few things about the Trump presidency, which I originally used to love and see now, which could lead to his eventual downfall in November. First of all, Trump is obviously politically and economically correct in calling for much larger stimulus payments for Americans, with the latest Gallup polling showing a full 70% saying that they favor more direct aid to Americans. But more importantly, he's also far more in line with the GOP base than any of the Republican lawmakers who object to payments out of concerns about the deficit. Gallup found 64% of Republican voters want another round of direct stimulus payments. Yes, you heard that correctly. More than 2/3 of Republican voters. So what's the problem then exactly? The problem is that Trump and the White House have not done anything to make Republicans who oppose stimulus payments or are deficit hawks for no particular reason pay a real political price for opposing him. At this point, lawmakers on Capitol Hill can reasonably assume that while Trump may tweet angrily, that they personally will not be called out as long as they pretend to care about Burisma or Russiagate. And yes, I'm talking about Lindsey Graham and Ron Johnson. So guess what? That's exactly what happened. Senator John Thune, a member of the Republican leadership in the Senate, immediately told reporters on Capitol Hill, if the size of the payments increase, that fewer Republicans would support it, saying, quote, you'll start to lose Republican support pretty quickly, adding that a $1.5 trillion figure would create a lot of heartburn in terms of the overall amount. So let's break down that idiotic statement for what it is. The current bill offered by Senate Republicans is $300 billion. It did not include any attempt at stimulus payments for Americans, meaning any increase from that is going to cause heartburn? But more importantly, why the hell are these people allowed to flaunt the leader of their party so openly? If Ted Cruz won the Republican nomination in 2016, so be it. I wouldn't say a word. But he didn't. In fact, he didn't explicitly, because the people who call themselves Republicans are a lot more like Donald Trump on this matter than your median or average Republican senator. Let's just get a quick sample, shall we? Who exactly are these Republican senators who are openly bucking the president, their voters, and economic common sense? Well, what I've always loved is that two of them come from critical Trump states of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Perhaps one of the most ardent Reaganite conservatives in the legislative body is Pat Toomey, and he's closely followed by Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Well, latest polling on Toomey's approval in his home state isn't immediately available. But a Marquette University poll of Wisconsin, taken just 5 days ago, shows Johnson with a 32% approval rating in his own home state. If Ron Johnson and Pat Toomey want to survive politically, Trump should tie their political futures to supporting his push to actually increase the size of coronavirus payments. I haven't even mentioned Rand Paul because he's mostly a lost cause, but it's the same story. A Quinnipiac poll came out yesterday showing Trump leading Biden by 20 points. That's 11 more than Mitch McConnell in the state of Kentucky, who I have to assume is more liked than even Rand Paul. So digest that. In the case of the three most ardent opponents of spending in the Republican Party, Trump is the single most popular Republican figure in all three of their home states, more so than they are. From the beginning, Trump's greatest failure has been his inability to transfer his personal dynamism and popularity within the Republican Party into changing the Republican Party, which opposed him with everything they had back in 2016. But look, there's no time like the present. The electoral prospects for the GOP are terribly bleak right now. GOP governors who appear to downplay the coronavirus in favor of prioritizing their economies are the least popular in the country. Senators like Susan Collins, Joni Ernst, Martha McSally, Tom Tillis, they could be headed for the exits come November, even if Trump does win in the Electoral College. Forget an October surprise. We need a September surprise. That surprise could be the passage of a historic stimulus bill with relief to American workers before the election. It would be politically impossible for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to oppose such a plan with 50 days to go. And the only reason that they're not paying a political price right now is because the Senate Republicans' $300 billion proposal is so pathetic that many associate it with worse than doing nothing at all. The only thing standing in Trump's way is not himself. It's the GOP establishment. It's the Republican senators who secretly want to return to the minority. Why? Because it's much easier to be the party out of power. Talk a big game about repealing and replacing certain bills, fundraising boatloads of money so you and your spouse can gallivant around the country with billionaires at donor summits in Wichita. But when you're in power, it's your turn to actually do something. And if Trump internalizes this moment and forces these Republicans to abandon their unpopular fiscal policy, he might actually make sure that they all have a shot at re-election come November. It's very interesting, too, Crystal. I was just looking at Sunbelt voters. Cook Political Institute and the Kaiser Family Foundation. The economy is the #1 issue in Arizona and in Florida. And within those Sun Belt voters, you can actually see that Trump still maintains a slight edge over Biden whenever it comes to economic trust. In these particular cases, it's guys like Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, who is one of the biggest deficit hawks in all of Congress. Oh, and Rick Scott has a 30% approval rating back in Florida.
Right.
So I'm like, well, what's the correlation going on here, folks? Why does Ron DeSantis have a 28% approval rating? It's the same thing. If Trump actually steps forward, he can save these people from themselves. Their own polling shows that 2/3 of Republicans are desperate for more stimulus. And yet somehow you have the Republican leadership in Congress being like, oh, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, it's insane. And you couple that with the numbers that we showed yesterday, like the Senate Republican economic response has been terrible. And the Republican governor response of the ones who have followed Trump's lead has been terrible. And I just pulled back up those approval ratings. Look, the worst approval ratings for governors in the country are in Iowa, Florida, and Arizona, 3 rather important states for the election. So, I mean, the whole handling from the economic response to the actual response to the pandemic has been and continues to be a disaster. And it's sort of like, I guess I'll believe it when I see it with Trump if he actually puts any pressure on senators. It's one thing to send out a tweet. Mark Meadows was apparently on Fox and Friends this morning saying, hey, we're down with $1.5 trillion, and that's what the quote-unquote problem solvers caucus had proposed to Nancy Pelosi. So trying to put some pressure there. Like, maybe. But the problem with him is that he didn't know what he wanted from the beginning. If he did, he would have gotten it, right? If he knew exactly, like, I want stimulus payments, I want extended unemployment, here's what I want in terms of state and local aid, and went down the line and put pressure on Republicans, he could have gotten whatever he wanted. The smartest thing for him to do at this point would be to just say yes to the House Democrats. Say yes to them and put that, then they're in the box. Of course, like, they can't then back down from the bill that they already passed, partner up with, put pressure on Republican caucus in the Senate, partner up with Democrats in the Senate as well, and get it done. It would be the best thing for the American people at this point, and it would be the best thing for him politically. It would put Democrats in a very tough position.
Only the fools in the Republican caucus could say we should not pass stimulus payments before an election, especially 50 days before an election.
When
your opponents are begging you to do so. Oh, and their opponents have probably read them pretty well. They're like, oh, these idiots won't do it. There's no way. So we should be on the side. Trump is not at least a moron whenever it comes to this politically. And look, you're right. The Problem Solvers Caucus, who the hell knows where it's going to go, but it's a $1.5 trillion bill with some stimulus payments, I think around the $1,200 figure that was sent around last time. If Trump and them start whipping votes against that, and here's the most critical thing. It's not just you ask somebody to vote. You have to say, you don't vote this way, you're going to pay a price in your own home state. And everybody at home is going to know you voted against me, and I'm 10 times more popular than you. You could say that to Mitch McConnell. He's got to run for office right now. You could say that to Rand, Ron Johnson, Pat Toomey, Lindsey Graham, Martha McSally, Joni Ernst, so many of these other people. It's like, you show up and you vote, I'll give you some money, I'll come down and help you, I'll have my donors help you. If you don't, you're frozen out. And what are they going to do? They have to play ball.
And also think about, and this is actually, I mean, I thought from the beginning of his presidency that Trump, because he had no allegiance really to the Republican Party, that there may be multiple instances where he actually did work with Democrats on infrastructure being the most obvious example, where if you're saying, I'm going to spend a bunch of money and it's going to hit your district, it's going to hit your state, they would be hard pressed to refuse to work with him on some sort of reasonable infrastructure package. I thought he would be just as happy to stick it to the Republicans as he was to stick it to the Democrats. And frankly, the American people would love that.
They would love it.
How much would they love to see right now Trump teaming up with the Democrats and like giving them their way in order to do something good for the American people? And that's why I'm so skeptical that anything approaching that will ever actually happen, because you just haven't seen it one single time as an administration. One day, whoever he's listening to, whoever has his ear today is like, actually, look at these numbers. We got to do the stimulus, and he's buying that. Tomorrow, he could be back on the phone with Art Laffer and, you know, Larry Kudlow be running the show again or whatever. Like, he's just that all over the place because he doesn't actually have a theory of what he wants and can consistently push for it. So Republicans know they will pay no price.
Well, we'll see. All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.